Welcome back, guys. It is week 3 of the Lit and Lang Gang podcast, and this week we are talking about Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney.
Yes.
You are with again me, Miss Graham, Miss Gray, who is the department expert on this poem, and Miss Gough, who is, despite the fact of Irish heritage, could not do an Irish accent in prep for this podcast.
I can't.
You absolute letdown.
I can't do much though. Let's be honest.
That is very true. Let's start the jingle.
Conversation, analytical interpretation, and igniting imagination with the Lit and Lang Gang.
Nice. I just love that. It gets better every time I hear it. Right. So, Storm on the Island. I am so excited. And I say that with not an ounce of sarcasm. So, we'll start with the context, first of all. Some of the basic context for this poem, obviously, it's written by Seamus Heaney. I know it looks like it's Seamus, but it's Seamus. He is Irish. He lived in Ireland, okay? And that obviously, if we think about this idea of a storm on an island, he lived in a very rural countryside community. They were affected by storms. There's a lot of references in the poem to that kind of farming community, and obviously so we can think about it on that kind of surface level. So on a very basic level, the context is that the poet is Irish. It's a poem about an island.
It's an experience he would be familiar with.
Absolutely, exactly. However, there is a bit of a deeper contextual understanding we can take from this poem, and that is that the entire poem is actually an extended metaphor for what was referred to as the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Now, I'm not a history teacher, so I don't have a huge amount of knowledge about this, but there are some good websites out there you can look at. There's a great BBC website. If you type in BBC, the Troubles, there's a lot of information on there. But it was essentially, we had the Protestants and we had the Catholics, we had Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland who were separated. And I'm sure you will have heard of a group called the IRA, which basically committed a lot of bombings, a lot of violence. There was a lot of trouble, which is why it's referred to as the Troubles in Ireland. And they were essentially set up, they were trying to protect the Catholics and drive out the British. So that was what they were, essentially a terrorist organisation.
They were attacking Britain as well, weren't they?
Yeah.
It wasn't just in Ireland, it was here too.
I have heard a rumour as well that they did try and blow up one of the things on Canvey, you know, where they've got the power things off of Canvey. They tried to, but the bomb didn't work, or they put it in the wrong flume or something. I remember my mum telling me that years ago. Could be a complete lie, but and the reason that we can think about it being this metaphor for the IRA and for the Protestants and the Catholics is largely because of the title. So, Storm on the Island. The Parliament buildings in Ireland are called the Stormont Estate. So Stormont. So think about that title, Stormont Island. So it's about, you know, we've got that hint there, that little hidden meaning that potentially this poem actually is not about the weather at all, but it's actually about these people who are facing this sort of these troubles and have faced it for a long time. So that's what we can look at there. There are a few things in the poem as well before we think about the language. There are a few lexical choices, so word choices, that link into this, and they are salvo, which is in the poem, which means sort of simultaneous artillery shells, so being bombarded by those artillery shells, and strafes, which is referred to as the wind, that actually means being attacked repeatedly with bombs and machine guns. So those word choices are very interesting to describe the weather, and again, we've got that idea of it perhaps being that extended metaphor. So contextually, obviously we've got that first point that Seamus Heaney was Irish. He's used to this kind of weather and this kind of rural location, but also about this idea of the Troubles in Ireland. So say Stormont Estate. That's something worth researching.
Do you reckon students could hinge a whole answer on that conceit, or is it, or do you reckon it's like a point to consider? I wonder if it could be a whole answer to say it's a conceit, or do you have to acknowledge there's a natural element to it?
Well,
I mean, because some people read just London, they read as just a French a protest against people in and the kind of like challenging ideas of the French Revolution.
It's largely about how you interpret it. When I first read this poem, this is why I love this poem. When I first read it, I was like, what a great poem about the weather. brilliant. And then I did a bit more research and found out a bit more, and I thought, wow. And when I actually looked through it, I couldn't believe the hidden things within there that are hidden. They're not obvious. And it almost makes you feel like you're part of a secret club when you know that little hidden meaning there. So I think you probably could, if you were confident with that knowledge, you could absolutely use that. And then when we think about the themes later, I was going to say you can link it to that idea of the power of people and the government, and this idea of sort of terrorism as well. And you can even link it into those ideas as well. So it's certainly a poem that can be used on lots of different levels. Another reason why I love it. It's a very good one to use. So if we have a little look at the language then, the language in this poem, we start with that collective pronoun we. We are prepared. So straight away we've got that idea of community being brought together. It's not just, it's not a character, it's not the poet, it's not the audience, it's everybody.
Gives that idea of, conversely with the rest of the poem, safety, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that idea, we're prepared. And we've got that colon there, and I like to view that as like their barrier against the storm. So that colon is showing that barrier. We are prepared for this. They talk about building our houses squat. Okay, they're short, they're safe. Everything about that first few lines, sort of lines 1 to 4, are about how safe they are and how everything has been put together to protect them. And obviously we could think it's about the weather, or we could think it's about the IRA and the greater troubles within Northern Ireland. But they are protected there. But from that moment on, from about sort of line 4, 5 onwards, we find out they're not really prepared. They're not safe.
There's a Volta again, isn't there?
Absolutely. Nothing can protect them. So we've got this idea, we are prepared. They've built our houses. They're safe. They're comfortable. But then we're actually told there are no stacks or stooks that can be lost. So that's actually suggesting they have very little. They're not worried because they've got nothing to lose. They can't lose anything. Nothing to lose here. They have very little. They're a little despondent even. There's nothing that can be lost. We're not troubled. Again, we've got that word troubled. So if we think about the troubles.
The Irish troubles.
We're not troubled. We don't have very much to lose. But then we talk about these trees. Okay, we've got the nor are there trees which might prove company when it blows full blast. And you've got another colon, and this is where the storm starts to hit. So the first colon in the poem represents we're safe, we're prepared. We're told how they're prepared, but actually how they don't have much to lose. And then we've got a second colon, which is just preceded by that onomatopoeic blast. Okay, we've got that idea of that blast, that powerful word there.
Or it's echoed with when it blows full blast, that double plosive.
Absolutely, yes. We've got that plosive sort of alliteration there. The blows full blast. This is where the hit is. Now, again, whether you're looking at this from a weather perspective or from a more deeper perspective, either way, this is where it begins. And we've got quite an unusual turn in tone. You know what I mean? It becomes very conversational, which again makes them sound quite prepared and quite unafraid. They're not worried about this. You know what I mean. We're saying that sort of quotation there, very colloquial, very friendly. But then it talks about leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale. So you can listen to the thing you fear, forgetting it pummels your house too. So that whole section there is talking about how, you know what I mean, when you're sitting at home, and we can imagine that as an audience, it's almost talking to us as an audience and bringing us in here, thinking about the reader. When you sit at home and you can hear the wind and the trees blowing and the wind going through them.
That's really ironic, because I've written here about the tragic chorus and it being like a Greek tragedy. So in Greek plays, they would have a group of people on stage that it would be their job to tell the story, and that's actually where the origin of that happy and sad mask face that you use in drama, that comes from the Greek tragedy, and specifically the chorus that would be wearing masks. And you're saying here, this is that bit where it tells a story, you can imagine like this, and that's actually echoing the fact that it mentions a chorus.
Absolutely.
Really good.
Absolutely.
For the record, Miss Graham hates this poem, and Miss Gray's going to try and convince me to love it. I am seeing more in it.
There we go. We're barely even touched the surface. Just you wait.
This is a long episode.
So obviously we've got that tragic chorus, and as you say, links to obviously the Greek tragedy, those kind of ideas. It's fairly oxymoronic in its way. It's quite an oxymoron. Tragic chorus. Chorus is normally kind of an upbeat, joyful element. Tragic is that awful kind of terrible moment. But it's actually the tragic chorus is a distraction from the thing they fear. But again, they don't have that.
Yeah.
They don't have a distraction. So not only do they have nothing to lose, they don't have a distraction either. Mm-hmm. They have very, very little in this poem, which is quite an interesting perspective to consider. And the fact that they have so little, forgetting it pummels your house too. Almost that sort of false sense of security kind of sort of being hinted to there. But certainly we've got that tragic chorus there, and as you said, the Greek links and the oxymoron. But then we continue through. So he goes into a conversational phrase. He talks about that. Then we've got another change in tone again. But there are no trees.
Contrasting, connected.
No natural shelter. So we've got that conversational, that thing, but there are no trees. And then we're back in where they are.
Yeah.
No trees, no shelter. We've got that repetition, obviously, of the word no. We've got that idea that the storm is now sort of becoming a real threat to them. There's nothing to protect them. They have their houses, we've already know that, but that's a distant memory now. That was a long time ago. Now the storm is arriving. There's no trees, no natural shelter. So the world isn't helping them. So when we think about the power of nature, nature is not protecting them. Nature is attacking them. And it's not offering them anything in protection.
Could you argue, like, natural shelter, it's natural for humans to support one another, and if you take that conceit meaning of the poem, the unnatural way of humans turning on one another?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an overread or not. But
no, absolutely. You could definitely consider that element, that aspect, and that sort of, again, linking it to the idea of people. No trees, no natural shelter. Then again, we've got that conversational tone again. You might think the sea is company, exploding comfortably down the cliffs. Already in that exploding comfortably, again, another oxymoron. We've got a hint, no, it's not. You might think the sea is company, but it's exploding. It's comfortable, but it's exploding. It's showing the power, it's showing the force of it. And then we've got again, but no, another colon. And this is when the storm really hits. This is when nature betrays them. This is when it really, really hits them. That third colon is that sign of the storm really taking control. It's intensifying with the power of the sea. And when you think of the sea, I mean, the sea terrifies me. I watched In the Deep with David Attenborough or something, and there were creatures down there I just cannot even imagine. So the sea terrifies me. So the idea...
Goodwin's the same. She won't go in the sea.
I do not blame her. There are sharks in there. Why would you go somewhere where there are sharks? So, that danger, it's terrifying. And then we've even got, and this is the real betrayal for me, the flung spray hits the very window, spits like a tame cat turned savage. I've got 2 cats.
They are not savage.
They are not savage. They are tame. Hideous. But cats are not hideous. I love cats. So cats are not, we've got this tame cat. We trust the cat, okay? We trust the cat. No, this is serious. We trust the cat. It's tame, but it's turned. You think you've trained it. You think you've got it sorted. You think you've got it under control, but it turns. Okay, and it spits, and it's that simile. It's showing the unpredictability of it. It's wild. It's out of control. You think you've got it tame. Okay, I think my cats are beautiful, and they're very tame and lovely.
Cats are fine.
But I'm sure they could, given the right opportunity, turn. And that's the thing, it's the unpredictability.
Yeah. I was just going to say, because we've got these oxymorons that are creeping in the poem. There's like a series of opposites, like a tame cat that then turns savage as well. Sorry.
Miss Graham's laughing at my swallow. I don't even know if you can hear this on the podcast.
I sit in meetings and your swallow is so loud.
I think I go closer to it so they can hear the real
You probably
swallow.
can't even hear.
That is ridiculous.
It's a loud swallow. I apologise if it's been disturbing your learning. What were you saying, Miss Gough? Sorry.
The oxymorons that you've got and the kind of differences in the poem, and then the spits like a tame cat turned savage.
Yeah.
I was kind of reading that obviously in society you have lots of different political viewpoints and people. You are meant to respect that everybody's got that freedom of speech. But there are points when it sometimes crosses the line too much and people turn savage. So it's almost like, because things were getting a little bit out of hand in society, perhaps the government weren't really stepping in at that time for him, that things do turn savage and they become uncontrollable. Like
or things
storm.
like religion, which would be seen as a man-made you might argue a man-made creation, or a belief that you follow to bring peace, is actually bringing savagery.
Absolutely. Actually, if you Google the Troubles in Ireland, there's a lot of interesting imagery and pictures where they would paint on buildings and walls and billboards, almost sort of propaganda, and they would have these pictures of sort of men with guns and sort of masks on and things like that, but saying, we just want to protect, we're just protecting ourselves. They didn't see themselves as savage, even if they were bombing or attacking.
No.
So it's that kind of idea of, you know, that tameness and that savage and that turning and all those sorts of things. But at that point, you know, that's the kind of the climax of the storm, that's the intensity of it. And it's I find it really interesting that he uses that simile of a cat.
Yeah.
Which seemingly is
such
domestic. A domestic, mild, you know, if we referred it to a lion or anything like that, it would be more understandable. But to use a cat, it's very unusual, but very effective as well in the way that he describes that.
Almost that anyone can be like that.
Absolutely.
If given the chance or encouraged, maybe.
Even those who you think are innocent and you think are tame can turn, given the right situation.
Yeah.
But we've got there after that. So after that simile, we just sit tight while wind dives and strafes, and that's the idea about that imagery relating to that concept there, that strafes being attacked repeatedly. So we just sit tight, very powerless there, very powerless against anything, showing that they cannot do anything. Again, space is a salvo, so again, that artillery shells, that sort of military language. We are bombarded. Again, military language, that idea of it being... you know, unstoppable, but by the empty air. And towards the end here, there's a real semantic field of isolation, the unknown, and emptiness. So we've got invisibly, empty air, and nothing, which is creates this idea of emptiness, but also, I think, the unknown and perhaps isolation, which could link to the storm or could link to other wider things. But that last line, I just find it so bizarre, strange. It's a huge nothing we fear. It's a very anticlimactical. It's very anticlimax at the end. Huge nothing, obviously another oxymoron. And it's that, again, goes back to that colloquial strange. It's a huge nothing we fear. Now, this is where the extended metaphor kind of falls apart a little bit, I think. Because actually the IRA and the Protestant and the Catholic divide and the Troubles were not a huge nothing.
No, they were a terrorist organisation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's where that metaphor falls apart a little bit. However, I think you can still think about the fact that maybe they know very little about it. And that's the nothing, the fact that they don't know about it, that they have no control over it. But I find that last line very peculiar. In place with the rest of the poem.
Kind of undermines it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, it does. I mean, obviously, you've got an element of irony there.
I mean, could it even be an attempt to downplay it, to somehow... I mean, this is a poem about power, whether it's nature or real people. Could it be an attempt to kind of downplay an opponent?
Yeah, maybe downplay the political side of it too, because especially if he's a prominent Irish poet, you don't want to step on too many people's toes, do you?
Well, this is true.
Bit cautious.
Bit diplomatic at the end there, perhaps. Yeah, definitely.
Really.
But that's sort of the language side of things. There's a huge amount of things you can take out of here. Loads and loads of wonderful techniques that are being used. If we move on to structure and think about the structure, there's not a huge amount to say here, but still some things that are relevant. Obviously, it's all one stanza. I think we can pretty much know that that's reflective of an island or a group of people, or it's showing that togetherness. Again, it starts with that collective pronoun we, and it's one stanza.
It shows togetherness and at the same time isolation, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, it shows that isolation, the fact that they're by themselves. Could be obviously referring to the people or the island or the ideals or whatever it is that Seamus is trying to tell us. It's written in blank verse, free verse. It's very unstructured, which again is what I like about it. I don't like poetry that sort of skips along in iambic pentameter and has a lovely rhyme scheme. I quite like this because it is so unstructured, and the important things to think about in this are obviously the caesura and the enjambment, which is rife in this poem. Okay,
It
is rife with enjambment. Yeah, exactly. So in case you're not confident, enjambment obviously is where we have that the sentence carrying across 2 lines. The caesura is kind of the sudden stop, so wherever the colons are, that's where we've got that caesura there. And there's a few other places where it's done less brutally than that. But I think, again, that is just reflecting the unpredictability of either the weather, the storm, or obviously the people and the IRA and those troubles. It's showing the uncertainty. And I think that's very, very clear. It's not a nicely structured poem. It's all over the place. It's a mess, really, if you look at it and actually read it as it is. And that is exactly what I think he's trying to show. I think he's trying to show us that unpredictability, the fact that no one knows what's going to happen, no one knows where it's going to go, no one knows what's going to happen next. And it's exactly the same if you were in a storm. Okay, sometimes it dies down, then picks up again, then it's raining, then there's wind, there's thunder, there's lightning. You never know exactly what's going to happen, and it's impossible to predict. So I think with the structure, he's trying to show us this. And you said, didn't you, about the idea of it being, you know, like a microcosm.
Yeah, of society, the island. So it kind of looks like the squat house.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it does, even on the page, it does look relatively, it's interesting, isn't it? It does look relatively kind of even on the outside, but then when you look at it, language-wise and structurally-wise, it looks quite
internally,
chaotic.
it's chaotic.
Yeah, internally.
Absolutely, you've got that chaotic structure internally as well.
Yeah.
So moving on then, the themes. Obviously, we've talked about quite a lot in here with regards to themes. You've got power of nature, obviously. This is a great one to use. And that's when, I think the beauty of this poem is that if the question's about the power of nature, you can focus on that storm and talk about the ideas of the storm and just mention now and then about some of the other things of what it could be. It's a good alternative interpretation.
Yeah, definitely.
However, if you've got a question about the power of people, or if you've got a question about the power or even of society or anything like that, you could think about that deeper meaning and that extended metaphor. I would only advise doing that if you're confident and if you feel like you've really got a good understanding of that, because I think even that's something I'd even find quite difficult to do.
It's with sometimes a lot of these quite perceptive points, it's not always about the point itself, it's how you word it and how you frame it. So you could have the most perceptive point, but if you word it in a slightly wishy-washy way, the examiner's not going to follow what you're saying.
No.
So when you are doing this, please be confident that you can do it. And I don't think any of us in the English department, if you wanted to trial a paragraph and say, does this read in the way that I'm intending it to, talk it through with your teacher, we'll sit down and have a look at it with you and say, do you know what, actually, I do think you're missing the mark there a little bit, or you've got it spot on. I would say, personally for me, if it was power of nature and this poem came up, I'd be picking exposure.
Absolutely.
The main reason being they're both about the power of the weather. Yes, you can pick Extract from the Prelude, Ozymandias. My only difference with those ones is that their power of nature is over time. I think we were saying a similar kind of thing when we looked at Extract from the Prelude. Their time, they do fit because they are the power of nature, but where those two are both explicitly or seemingly explicitly weather, they go together quite well. They're next to each other in the anthology. I hardly imagine that's a coincidence.
No.
And I think as well, if you think of exposure, and that is all about the effect of the weather on the soldiers, you know, it's about the effect of the weather on those people, and this is exactly the same. And you can even think about, you know, the war imagery that's used. You can talk about that in this poem with exposure, but still have your answer focused on the weather. So that's where you can get those sort of alternative interpretations in, and you can get perhaps some of those higher level sort of skills in there as well.
I mean, if a question came up as vague as, let's say it's this poem and it's something like conflict, let's hope it wouldn't be that vague. But I mean, to put it with exposure and talk about the conflict for both in terms of weather, but in terms of a battle that they're fighting.
Yes.
So you've got the battle of war, literal war, in exposure, but in this poem, it's the battle against seemingly could be terrorism.
Absolutely. No, there's a lot of things to consider, and that's why I like this poem. Have I changed your opinion?
I'm definitely more aware. I'm not entirely sure I'd say I like it. I still don't really like it.
I was just thinking as well, now because now you said about the power of people as well, this could be a good one to do with Charge of the Light Brigade. It's the idea that they go in with like 600 men and it's fruitless.
Yeah.
They're prepared, but they're not.
Yeah, they
It's
think
like
they're
doomed to
prepared,
foul,
don't they?
like with the
yeah.
storms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, could
So
definitely
they've not got that anything to protect them. It's a
Yeah.
really interesting idea. Yeah.
Super. Right. Thank you very much, Miss Gray. I would honestly say I don't think I knew that much about
No.
this poem.
There we go.
And you've actually made it the longest one of all of us.
Oh, I'm
so
really sorry.
that's
It's
right.
my excessive swallowing. That's the problem.
Okay. Thank you very much for tuning in, guys. I don't know what we're doing. What are we doing next, guys? We've got a number of poems to do.
It's got to be one with Mr. Grimmett,
How-
surely.
Mr. Grimmett, should we get him in for bayonet charge? We could do
Yeah.
Ozymandias
Yeah.
next. Well, we will decide as and when, and we will let you know. But thank you very much for tuning in again. Hope you found this useful, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.